The Fed's decision to lower interest rates was a move met with plenty of tension, especially among the members of the FOMC. Powell himself said that it's a time of difficult judgments with a variety of perspectives.
We're watching carefully, and there will come a time, I suspect, when we think we've done enough. But there may also come a time when the economy worsens, and we would then have to cut more aggressively. We don't know. We're going to be watching things carefully, the incoming data and the evolving situation. And that's what's going to guide us on that path.
Meanwhile, President Trump weighing in on the Fed's cut and whether or not Jerome Powell has job security. This is what he told Fox News.
Chairman Powell's job is safe?
It's safe, yeah, it's safe. I mean, sure, why not?
You paused.
No, I don't pause. I mean, he's got a job, and, I'm disappointed in him. I'm very disappointed in him. I think he raised far too fast. Mm-hmm. He also did quantitative tightening, which was not a good thing to do, but it's all right.
All right, Brian, you were there yesterday in the second row, and you got a question in. But there's a lot of division among those FOMC members. We had a 7-3 vote to indeed cut rates by 25 basis points. But on one hand, if you look at the economic data, it's not all that bad. But then on the other hand, you have all this uncertainty when it comes to trade. So what are these members thinking? What do you think the message is here?
And this is the big challenge here, right, is how do you try to steer the U.S. economy and say that you need to justify cutting rates, despite the fact that the numbers in the U.S. look pretty good. I mean, yes, the jobs report for August maybe missed estimates by a little bit, and we have indeed seen some softening in manufacturing and also in industrials because of the tariff-related issues. But other than that, I mean, the U.S. consumer is still very strong, and Jerome Powell has said that they represent 70% of the U.S. economy, and that's the real driver here. So that's why you have this big split. And as you mentioned, there were 3 dissents in the meeting yesterday. On one hand, you had St. Louis Fed President James Bullard advocating for 50 basis points of cuts. But then on the other side of the spectrum, you had Eric Rosengren and Esther George saying we didn't think there was a move warranted at all in this meeting. So if you're Jerome Powell, how do you kind of toe the line here? How do you make sure that you're representative of all these differing viewpoints on the economy from some of the best economist minds in the country and try to message that this is what the Fed policy is going to be because we went with the middle line of 25 basis points? Well, he said that's a really challenging thing. He actually, I think one of the direct quotes was, it's challenging, I'll admit it. Mm-hmm. This is a very tough time for Powell, and I think that Janet Yellen probably doesn't envy the fact that he's the Fed chair right now.
Not laughing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at that shot that we played there, Heidi, about Trump, and he seemed a lot more calm and, more nicer to the Fed at that point versus the tweet that he sent after the Fed made their decision where he was basically like, they have no courage. Like, he wanted a lot more out of them. So I wonder, with increasing pressure from President Trump, if we're going to see more than one more rate cut.
Well,
by the time the end of the year.
And we saw 7 members of the 17 FOMC participants actually telegraph the possibility of one more rate cut by the end of this year. Keep in mind there are 2 more Fed meetings for the rest of this year, one October, the last in December, in mid-December. And, these are members of the FOMC that see a case, as you can see, so the 7 dots on the bottom there of 2019, this is kind of the tea leaves, if you will, that analysts kind of read whenever the Fed releases these every other meeting. And we saw that 7 members say we can actually see the case for one more 25 basis point rate cut, but we're kind of in the dark here. And this is what Jerome Powell was trying to say in the press conference yesterday, is that we are data dependent, but at the same time, the reason why we've cut rates in the first place is because of these very imprecise measurements on the impact of trade policy and the geopolitical concerns that we have abroad. As far as Trump, there was one question in the meeting about whether or not that plays into anything. I mean, Trump's tweet came minutes after the announcement, so he's obviously watching this very closely.
Clearly, yeah.
Powell appeared to be reading off of prepared remarks almost and saying that basically the same thing. We're really focused on just steering the economy to how we do. We don't do it with any political mind. A lot of this kind of also escalating because of the Bill Dudley op-ed that we saw a few weeks ago. So there's a lot of moving parts here, but Powell's saying we're just being independent right now.
So right when the decision came out, the markets were down as much as 211 points at one point. But then Powell started speaking, and typically the markets don't generally like what he says. But do you think he sounded dovish enough for the markets to feel like, okay, they're open to cutting rates maybe one more time this year, perhaps in December? And is that what the market, you think, is essentially looking forward to?
I wouldn't say that he was all that dovish. I mean, we saw 7 members of the participants kind of saying we could see the case for another 25 basis point rate cut. But Powell was saying in the meeting that every member is taking it meeting by meeting. And if you look at the dot plots over the year, they've been actually a really bad indicator for where rates end up going. I mean, the last dot plot projection that we had projected basically 1 rate cut for the whole year. Well, we've gotten 2 rate cuts, and and we still have 2 more meetings. So as far as what Chairman Powell was doing in the press conference, as Chris Brown featuring Drake would say, no guidance. We're not really kind of trying to tell anybody where the next rates are going to go for the rest of the year.
All right, thanks, Brian. I always need a breakdown after the meeting, honestly.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.